After an entire season of crap, the last episode of The Flash was a genuinely fun and heartwarming final crossover for the Arrowverse, and now, this week's episode is also really good. This video is a review of The Flash Season 9 Episode 10, titled A New World Part 1, with the added subtitle in the episode itself of Reunions, which I really like that they added, not only because the title card itself is pretty cool that they had it there, but also, like I said in my previous video, A New World Part 1, Part 2, Part 3, and 4, especially for the series finale, is such an uncreative couple of episode titles, so I am glad they're adding the subtitle. For this episode, it's Reunions. Here's hoping the subtitle of the series finale will be something fitting like Run Barry Run. From the get-go, you could kind of tell that something is a bit different about this episode. The way it's shot, the way it's written, it feels like so much more time and care was put into it than any other episode this season, aside from the previous one, but that was a crossover, technically. Maybe because while they were autopilot writing the 3 filler episodes, they were really focused on this one and had more time to write this one and the next 3. And while that's probably going to end up making for a great final arc, it will not be good for the entire season as a whole, but that's not what I'm here to talk about. This is an episode review, and I thought the episode was excellent. Not perfect, but excellent. There are definitely some unfortunate negatives that did not need to be here, like the whole supporting cast opening montage that's completely disconnected from the rest of the episode. Allegra tries on this new costume and it's horrendous, it's hideous. We're to believe that Chester spent a lot of time on this. He really is a bargain bin Cisco. Then there's also a scene with Joe and Cecile, which is not great because, Cecile is there, but also the whole story resolution from a previous episode was terrible, and now in a scene addressing it is worsened because of it. Also, it's really weird to me that Joe had a going away episode and has since appeared more than Chillblaine, who is a series regular. I'm not complaining about Chillblaine not appearing, but why did they even make him a series regular? It means nothing. It makes no sense. Then there's the scene with Keon where she turns into a cloud and talks to her plants and says that she froze over a lake and writes a letter to Frost and Caitlin and then wishes she could speak to Mark, the former murderer. And it's just a really weird scene with unusual editing that does not help the off-putting Keon storyline that's been going on all season. Thankfully, that's where it ends for the supporting cast. The rest of the episode is about Barry Allen, which is so refreshing. I know the last episode also did focus primarily on Barry Allen, but just the 3 episodes in a row that didn't, or if it did, then the Flash didn't appear. I'm so glad we got these 2 episodes in a row that did indeed focus on Barry Allen, because I've said this before and I've said it a million times before, the supporting cast is awful. I do have a couple small nitpicks, like Joe West and Henry Allen not really looking young enough for the time 23 years ago, and the way Henry and Nora seem to care so much for this random man that kind of looks like Nora's father, and that was a bit unusual, especially since he's not that much younger than they are. Plus, how did Barry get knocked out by Thawne in that scene? Like, he had to go to the hospital? That seems a bit ridiculous, but that is where the negatives end. It is a lot of nitpicks, and a lot of nitpicks come together to make a problem, but that is where it ends. From right after the opening supporting cast montage, this episode puts its focus completely on Barry Allen, but it's not just some random Barry Allen adventure, it's what everything has been leading up to from the very beginning, the night Nora Allen died, from the perspective of that Flash. And let me tell you, as small scale as this ended up being, which might come off as anticlimactic, it did not disappoint in my opinion. From season 1, it was hinted that it would be an epic battle between Flash and Reverse Flash, stemming from a Red Sky crisis, which is clearly a crisis on Infinite Earths, from which they vanished that would lead into this final battle, and sure, that would have been more climactic, and honestly, if they had gone through with that, we probably would have been a little bit more satisfied, but with them having already done the crisis, and let's be honest, the budget of the show, maybe this is what they could have done, this more small-scale, stripped-down version, which maybe feels more personal than it would have. It allowed the characters involved to really soak it all in and breathe, which works and is helped by the fact that Matt Letcher's Reverse Flash was present for all of it. I've been saying this for years now, that while Tom Cavanagh was great at playing Thawne in Season 1, and any moments where Barry time travels to Season 1, it not only does not make sense for him to play the character outside of that time period, but also I don't think he ever really pulled it off afterwards either, whether that be in Crisis on Earth X, Season 5, Armageddon, or the negative arc of Season 8, there's always something off that does not recapture what made Thawne so compelling in Season 1. Meanwhile, Matt Letcher playing Eobard Thawne in Season 2 in Legends of Tomorrow during Flashpoint all of that did, meaning all of those Reverse Flash appearances I think would have been better if Matt Letcher was involved, not Tom Cavanagh. He did return last season in this very disappointing good guy role, but thankfully we do get to see him play the role for one last time, or at the very least it seems like one last time, in a full circle moment returning to the very beginning of the show. Barry and Thawne's rivalry throughout the episode is palpable. I mean, it's so great. The hatred coming from Thawne, trying to manipulate Barry into killing him just to ruin him, forcing him into a position where he can't do anything. It's a perfect hero-villain rivalry that you can't help but love to see. I wish we could have seen more of this pre-season 1 Thawne more throughout the show's run. I mean, we saw him once in season 2. We haven't seen his origin story. I wish we could have, but at least I'm glad we got to see him here. This all leads to this final pre-Nora Allen murder confrontation with this great scene of Barry trying to end their war. Thawne's hatred for Barry and Matt's performance is so fun to watch, and Grant Gustin is also great in this moment and throughout the episode as a whole. And finally, there's the murder of Nora Allen, the night Nora Allen died, and like last episode pulled me back to the good old days of the Arrowverse crossover events, this episode pulled me right back into the first season, the peak of this show. This is what the show was all leading up to, and we finally got to see how it happened, seeing season 1 Barry popping in, seeing season 9 Barry being the one to stop season 1 Barry from saving his mom, finally seeing the other side of that time loop. It truly makes everything go full circle in a honestly very satisfying way. We always thought it was the original timeline Barry in that house, but this reveal that it's actually the Barry from this timeline, that's actually kind of cool. It seems to me that there was never actually an original timeline. In every timeline, Thawne always kills Barry's mother, at the very least in this universe, and the quote-unquote original timeline was never actually a thing. Following this, Barry and Thawne have one final confrontation, probably the last time we'll ever see Matt Letcher on this show, adding a bit of context to Thawne's classic getting stuck in the past scene from season 1, with Barry and Thawne being on two separate ends of the show, and I love this scene. Barry has found peace, he's as far away from the pain this night caused as he's ever been, which is not only just great character work and character development and acting from Grant, but also a stark contrast to Thawne, who's so frustrated by the lack of pain Barry is feeling, and now we as an audience know what he's going to have to go through now. 15 years being stuck in the past, having to mentor Barry, and then he'll die, come back, die again, come back, die again. It does kind of feel like Barry Allen, the Flash, won this night, not Reverse Flash, and honestly, it works so well. I cannot complain about the way they resolved this 9-year-old storyline. It could have been the actual series finale, it could have been this big epic crossover, but this does feel personal, and honestly, I think it works. But what about the rest of the episode? Well, I did mention that the way that Nora and Henry treated Barry felt a bit weird, especially since they shouldn't be that much older than he is, maybe like 10 years older. But getting past all of that, it was a nice story, a touching final few scenes with Barry meeting and talking to his parents, which works really well as it leads into Barry's catharsis and peace in the final moment of that episode. However, I don't think that the way they got into it and the way it unfolded felt very natural, and that's definitely, not necessarily a negative, but it's not a positive either. It does do something positive, but the way they got there wasn't. The confrontation with the negative Speed Force was kind of cool, definitely helped by Joe being the one that's possessed, but I've never liked the idea or execution of these forces being given sentience, or especially being used as villains. He did have some cool dialogue, but overall, I'm glad that that part of the story seems to be pivoting its focus to whatever weird version of Eddie we're seeing here. In fact, I absolutely love the final scene of the episode as a direct remake or a negative remake of the scene where Barry got hit by lightning, complete with the lightning strike, the lightning storm, the raising chemicals, Eddie being thrown into those chemicals, and the nostalgic music that is such a cool way to introduce the new avatar of the negative Speed Force, and who seems to be the final villain of the show, Cobalt Blue. That wasn't the only callback of the episode. Right when Barry comes to the year 2000, which by the way came right after this very cute scene between Barry and Iris talking about their baby, which ended so abruptly that Barry's disappearance honestly came at a frightening shock in that moment. The abrupt scream and then he's just gone, and he seems to be in pain also when he's disappearing. I really like that effect. Like, that was genuinely cool. But right after that, Barry immediately tries to run back to the present, which is also a cool looking moment, and Barry is shown to know exactly what to do, but it also doesn't work, and Barry crashes into this truck filled with pillows, just like in the pilot. There's also the surprise cameo voice appearance of Martin Stein, there's Eddie's death being referenced, there's the whole original conceit of the first season that is called back to, and openly resolved in this episode. It's clear that this episode was based on and is referencing a lot the first season. It's clear what they were trying to do, and in that, I do think that they mostly succeeded. In conclusion, this episode is definitely not perfect, but absolutely gets an immediate rating boost for being as important to the show as it is, revolving around Barry and including Matt Letcher's Reverse Flash, resolving a plotline started by Season 1 and actually pulling that off, while further exploring Barry and Thawne's rivalry and Barry's emotional connection to these events, and doing it all really well. It's kind of insane because this episode was both written and directed by Eric Wallace, and it's like, where was this quality for the last 3 years? How do we go from one of the worst arcs in the show's history to a terrible 3-episode stretch of filler, followed then by 2 of the best episodes in the Eric Wallace era in a row? And with that in mind, I'm giving this episode this season's second 9 out of 10, and in a row. Maybe the season won't end up being as bad as we thought. Here's hoping that this final arc might actually stick the landing.